Men become careless when they believe a woman is too afraid to leave. Snow drifted slowly across the towering windows of the Moretti mansion, while golden chandelier light spilled over marble floors polished enough to reflect every movement inside the dining hall. Long tables covered in black linen stretched beneath crystal glasses and expensive whiskey, while men in dark tailored suits laughed quietly through cigar smoke and low jazz playing somewhere in the background. Outside the estate, black security vehicles lined the circular driveway beneath the falling snow like silent shadows guarding a kingdom built on fear and loyalty. At the center of the table sat Vincent Moretti, one hand resting lazily around a whiskey glass, while powerful men listened carefully every time he spoke. At 40 years old, Vincent carried the kind of presence that made rooms quieter without effort. Calm, dangerous, untouchable. His dark charcoal suit fit perfectly against broad shoulders, while silver cufflinks glinted beneath the chandelier above him. Across the hall, hidden partially behind the curved staircase leading toward the upper floor, Elena Vale stood motionless in a long ivory silk dress, with one hand resting lightly against the cold wooden railing. From a distance, she looked elegant enough to belong inside the mansion. Up close, there was something quieter in her eyes. The kind of silence that forms after years of carefully swallowing emotions no one asks about anymore. One of Vincent's captains laughed while pouring another glass of whiskey. You never worry your wife might finally get tired of this life. The men around the table smirked faintly. Vincent barely looked up from his drink. Elena. He laughed softly under his breath. My wife is terrified of the outside world. Low chuckles spread through the room. Someone muttered. Still, beautiful women surprise men every day. Vincent shook his head calmly. Not her. He leaned back in his chair with complete certainty resting inside his expression. She is too soft to leave. The laughter around the table deepened slightly. Upstairs, Elena lowered her eyes toward the marble floor beneath her bare feet, while the words settled heavily inside the quiet space around her. She did not react, did not cry, did not interrupt the conversation below. That was the dangerous thing about women like Elena. Men mistook silence for weakness because they never noticed how much strength surviving quietly actually required. Vincent continued speaking downstairs while snow pressed softly against the mansion windows. Elena likes comfort. Safety. She would not survive a week outside this life. Another glass clinked gently against the table. Then you are lucky, someone replied. Vincent smiled faintly. I know. Elena stood perfectly still for several more seconds before turning silently away from the staircase. No guards noticed her walking down the long upper hallway toward the piano room hidden at the east side of the mansion. The house felt colder away from the dining hall noise. Empty corridors stretched beneath dim golden wall lights, while distant laughter echoed faintly through marble and wood. Inside the piano room, moonlight and snowfall reflected softly across the black, grand piano near the windows. Elena crossed the room slowly before lowering herself onto the velvet bench. For a long moment, she simply stared at the ivory piano keys resting beneath her fingertips. Years ago, before becoming Vincent Moretti's wife, Elena used to perform classical piano in crowded New York hotels and quiet Boston lounges where strangers actually listened to music because they loved it. Back then, people asked her what she dreamed about. Somewhere along the way, those questions disappeared. Now security guards opened doors for her everywhere, while nobody truly noticed how lonely she had become inside the mansion. Elena pressed one soft note against the piano keys. The sound echoed gently through the empty room while snow continued falling outside the massive windows. Downstairs, Vincent's laughter drifted faintly upward through the halls. Elena closed her eyes slowly after hearing it. Then something inside her became strangely calm. Not angry, not dramatic, just finished. Her gaze shifted quietly toward the small leather passport holder resting inside the open piano bench beside folded sheet music and an envelope hidden carefully beneath it all. Snowfall reflected silver against the dark piano while Elena touched the edge of the envelope with trembling fingers. Because long before Vincent Moretti laughed about her being too weak to leave, Elena had already started planning exactly how she would disappear. Luxury becomes a prison the moment a person no longer remembers what freedom feels like. Morning arrived slowly over the Moretti estate beneath heavy gray skies and falling snow that covered the iron gates, stone fountains, and black security vehicles parked outside the mansion like silent statues. Inside, the house remained painfully quiet despite its enormous size. Long marble hallways stretched beneath gold wall lights while staff moved carefully through the rooms, speaking in lowered voices as if the mansion itself demanded silence from everyone living inside it. Elena stood alone near the east wing windows wearing a cream cashmere sweater over silk pants, while warm tea cooled untouched beside her hands. Outside the glass, snow drifted softly across the frozen gardens surrounding the estate. Two armed guards stood near the front gate below, visible even from the second floor. Vincent called it protection. Elena stopped believing that years ago. Somewhere downstairs, heavy footsteps echoed faintly through the halls before fading away again. Life inside the mansion moved according to Vincent's world. Meetings, security updates, late-night visitors in expensive suits, men speaking quietly about loyalty and territory while Elena sat through dinners pretending not to hear conversations everyone assumed she was too delicate to understand. That was another mistake people made around quiet women. They confused softness with ignorance. Elena noticed everything. The coded conversations, the hidden tension inside Vincent's voice after midnight phone calls, the way security doubled whenever certain black cars arrived after dark. She simply learned long ago that surviving inside powerful men's worlds often required silence more than confrontation. Elena wrapped both hands around the teacup while staring toward the snowfall outside. Once upon a time, winter used to mean music halls and crowded city streets decorated with Christmas lights while she performed piano beneath warm spotlights in Boston lounges. Now winters felt muted inside marble rooms too large to feel human. A maid entered carefully carrying fresh flowers before placing them near the piano room entrance. "Mr. Moretti asked if you will attend dinner tonight," she said politely. Elena nodded faintly. "Of course." The maid hesitated before quietly adding, "The blue dress arrived from Milan this morning." Elena lowered her eyes. Another expensive gift chosen for her by someone else. "Thank you." After the maid disappeared, Elena crossed the hallway toward the piano room again. Sunlight struggled faintly through the snowfall outside, while the black grand piano reflected pale, silver light across its polished surface. Elena sat slowly on the velvet bench before resting her fingers against the ivory keys. Music used to make her feel alive. Now it mostly reminded her of who she used to be before becoming part of Vincent Moretti's carefully controlled world. She played softly anyway. A slow classical melody drifted through the empty mansion halls while snow continued falling beyond the windows. Somewhere during the second movement, Vincent appeared silently near the doorway watching her. Dark suit, black wool coat still dusted lightly with snowflakes from outside. Even standing still, he carried the quiet danger of a man used to controlling every room he entered. Elena stopped playing almost immediately after noticing him. Vincent studied her for a moment before walking farther inside. "Why did you stop?" Elena lowered her hands into her lap. "You look distracted." Vincent poured himself whiskey from the crystal decanter beside the piano. "Business." Elena almost smiled faintly. Business. That word covered everything in his life. Long nights, armed guards, bloodless conversations carrying invisible threats beneath calm voices. Vincent leaned casually against the piano while sipping the whiskey slowly. "You should go into the city today," he muttered. "Buy something." Elena stared quietly toward the falling snow outside. "I do not need anything." Vincent looked at her carefully then, noticing the distance in her voice without fully understanding it yet. "You have barely left the house in weeks." Elena finally turned toward him. "Neither have I been allowed to." Silence settled heavily between them after that. Vincent's jaw tightened slightly. "You know why security stays close?" Elena nodded once. "Yes, because you believe the world is dangerous." Vincent stepped closer toward the piano. "It is dangerous." Elena held his gaze calmly for several seconds before answering in a voice almost too soft to hear. "Sometimes cages are dangerous too." The room became completely still after that. Snow drifted slowly outside the mansion windows while the unfinished melody lingered faintly in the air between them. Vincent stared at Elena like he suddenly sensed something changing beneath her silence, but could not yet understand what it was. Then his phone buzzed sharply inside his coat pocket. Instantly, his attention shifted away from her again. Elena watched him answer the call while turning toward the windows, already mentally leaving the room before the conversation even began. And in that quiet moment beside the piano, Elena realized something painful with absolute clarity. Vincent Moretti protected her carefully, provided for her endlessly, controlled every detail of her life completely. But somewhere along the way, he stopped truly seeing her at all. The most terrifying disappearances are the quiet ones because nobody notices they are happening until the silence becomes impossible to ignore. Snow covered the Moretti estate heavily the morning Elena vanished. White frost clung to the iron gates while cold gray light spilled across the frozen gardens surrounding the mansion. Inside, the house remained unnaturally still. No piano music drifting through the east wing. No soft footsteps crossing marble floors. Even the staff moved slower somehow, sensing something wrong before anyone dared speak it aloud. Vincent returned to the mansion shortly after dawn wearing a black wool coat dusted with snowflakes and exhaustion carved sharply across his face. He had spent the entire night handling business in Manhattan, while security convoys carried him through empty winter streets beneath freezing rain. Usually when he arrived home this early, Elena would already be awake near the piano room windows holding tea beside the snowfall. This morning the mansion felt hollow instead. Vincent loosened his gloves while walking through the silent entrance hall. "Where is Elena?" he asked one of the house staff without looking up. The woman hesitated slightly. "We have not seen Mrs. Moretti this morning." Vincent barely reacted at first. Elena often disappeared into the library or piano room for hours without speaking to anyone. Quiet women developed invisible habits inside lonely houses. He continued walking toward the east wing while removing his coat slowly. But something felt wrong immediately. The piano room door stood slightly open. Cold winter light spilled across the floor inside, while silence pressed heavily against the walls. Vincent stepped into the room and stopped completely. The black grand piano sat motionless beneath the windows. Snow drifted softly beyond the glass. And resting carefully on the ivory piano keys sat Elena's wedding ring. Vincent stared at it without moving. For a second, the entire room seemed strangely distant around him. Then his eyes shifted lower toward the velvet bench beneath the piano. Empty. The leather passport holder hidden there for months was gone. "No," he muttered quietly. He crossed the room quickly then, opening drawers, scanning shelves, searching instinctively for signs this was temporary. A misunderstanding. But the details only deepened the silence growing inside his chest. Half the closet upstairs stood empty. Several dresses gone. Her old sheet music missing from the piano bench. The small silver necklace she wore before meeting him no longer resting beside the bathroom mirror. Not rushed. Planned. Vincent felt something unfamiliar tighten sharply beneath his ribs. Fear. Real fear. He pulled out his phone immediately. "Find her." His voice remained calm, but the mansion staff instantly recognized the danger hidden beneath it. Within minutes, security teams flooded the estate. Black SUVs roared through the snow-covered gates while phones rang endlessly throughout the mansion halls. Drivers questioned. Cameras checked. Private airports contacted. But hour after hour, nothing surfaced. No passport activity. No bank transactions. No confirmed sightings. Elena Vale had disappeared from Vincent Moretti's world with terrifying precision. By late afternoon, snowstorms darkened the skies outside, while Vincent stood alone inside his office overlooking the frozen estate grounds. One of his captains shifted uncomfortably near the doorway. "We checked every route leaving the property." Vincent stared silently through the windows. And no cameras caught her face. Another long pause followed. It is almost like she knew exactly where surveillance was positioned. Vincent slowly turned then. The realization hit harder than anger ever could. Elena had been observing everything all along. The guards, the routines, the blind spots. While everyone treated her like decoration inside the mansion, she had quietly learned how to escape it perfectly. His captain lowered his voice carefully. "You think someone helped her?" Vincent looked toward the wedding ring now resting on his office desk beneath dim golden light. Snow reflected faintly against its surface. "No," he answered softly. "That is the problem." Evenings settled heavily over the mansion, while staff whispered quietly through empty hallways and untouched dinner tables remained cold beneath chandelier light. For years, Vincent Moretti believed Elena stayed because she was weak. Now he finally understood something deeply unsettling. Elena had stayed because she chose to. And the moment she stopped choosing him, even a man powerful enough to control an empire could not stop her from walking away. Freedom felt strangely small at first. Not glamorous, not dramatic. Just a quiet apartment in Boston where nobody watched Elena through security cameras or followed her footsteps through marble hallways anymore. 3 weeks after disappearing from the Moretti estate, Elena stood alone beside the window of a tiny third-floor apartment overlooking a snow-covered street near Beacon Hill. Morning light spilled softly across worn wooden floors while steam curled upward from a cheap paper coffee cup resting near the radiator. Outside, people hurried through fresh snowfall carrying grocery bags and umbrellas without recognizing the woman quietly rebuilding her life above them. Elena wrapped both hands around the warm coffee while staring toward the busy sidewalks below. For the first time in years, she could leave a room without guards opening doors behind her. Nobody asked where she was going. Nobody tracked how long she stayed outside. The silence around her no longer felt suffocating. It felt human. The apartment itself barely held enough space for a couch, piano keyboard, narrow bed, and stacks of books she bought secondhand from a nearby shop. Nothing matched. The sink leaked slightly. The heating pipes rattled loudly at night. And somehow Elena loved every imperfect inch of it. Because nothing inside the apartment belonged to Vincent Moretti's world. Snow drifted softly beyond the windows while Elena sat beside the keyboard pressing careful fingers against the worn piano keys. Quiet music filled the small room slowly. Hesitant at first, then steadier, like someone relearning how to breathe after years underwater. She stopped suddenly when her phone buzzed against the table nearby. Unknown number. Elena stared at the screen for several seconds before answering carefully. Hello. A warm female voice responded immediately. You left your scarf at the cafe yesterday. Elena relaxed slightly after recognizing the voice. Clara, the owner of the small jazz lounge where Elena occasionally played piano during quiet evenings. I can bring it later, Clara offered kindly. Elena smiled faintly. You do not have to. I am already downstairs. Elena crossed toward the apartment window and glanced below. Clara stood near the entrance holding a long cream scarf while snow collected softly across her dark coat. No black SUVs nearby. No armed guards. No men watching from parked cars. Just ordinary life moving calmly through winter streets. 10 minutes later, Clara sat cross-legged on Elena's couch sipping tea while soft jazz played from the tiny speaker near the kitchen. You should perform Friday night again, Clara said casually. People keep asking about the quiet blonde pianist. Elena lowered her eyes slightly. I am not really performing. Clara laughed softly. Then why did half the room cry during your last song? Elena almost smiled despite herself. Playing piano again felt different now. Not like the carefully polished performances Vincent arranged for wealthy guests during mansion parties. Those nights always felt decorative somehow. Like music existed merely to impress powerful men discussing business over whiskey. Inside Clara's jazz lounge, people actually listened. Tired waitresses closing late shifts. College students escaping snowstorms. Lonely strangers sitting quietly beneath warm amber lights. They listened because they needed to feel something real for a while. Elena wrapped both hands around her teacup slowly. I forgot music could feel honest. Clara studied her carefully. Whoever made you forget that must have been very good at controlling beautiful things. Silence settled gently between them. Elena looked toward the snowfall outside without answering. Because even now, part of her still struggled to believe she escaped successfully. Somewhere in New York, Vincent Moretti was still searching. She knew that with absolute certainty. Men like Vincent did not lose control gracefully. But another terrifying truth slowly settled inside her too. For the first time in years, Elena no longer wanted to go back. Later that evening, snowstorm winds rattled softly against the apartment windows while Elena sat alone beside the keyboard under dim yellow light. She opened the old leather notebook hidden inside her bag and stared quietly at a page filled with carefully written dates, train schedules, and security shift changes from the mansion. Years of observing, planning, preparing silently while everyone around her mistook obedience for helplessness. Elena traced one finger slowly across the final entry written months earlier. The day she planned to disappear. Then she closed the notebook gently before looking around the tiny apartment, glowing softly against the winter darkness outside. No luxury chandeliers. No guards. No fear pressing against her chest every morning. Just silence. Real silence. And for the first time in a very long time, Elena realized peace sounded nothing like the mansion at all. Sometimes freedom returns so quietly that a person does not realize they are healing until strangers begin noticing the light returning to their eyes. February settled heavily over Boston, while Elena slowly rebuilt a life that no longer revolved around fear, permission, or carefully measured silence. Snow still covered the sidewalks outside her apartment most mornings, but inside the tiny third-floor space, warmth finally existed again. Real warmth. The kind created by music drifting through small rooms, cheap coffee brewing near sunrise, and nobody controlling when she entered or left the front door. Elena developed routines that once would have seemed impossible inside the Moretti mansion. Walking alone through grocery stores beneath fluorescent lights. Carrying her own paper bags home through snow-covered streets. Sitting unnoticed in crowded cafes listening to strangers complain about ordinary things. She loved ordinary things now. They felt honest. Friday evenings became her favorite part of the week. The jazz lounge Clara owned sat beneath an old brick building near downtown Boston, where soft amber lights reflected across polished wood tables and snow-covered windows. No luxury chandeliers. No armed guards near the doors. Just tired musicians, students escaping cold weather, couples holding hands quietly over wine glasses, and lonely people searching for music strong enough to soften difficult weeks. Elena always arrived early carrying sheet music inside a worn black folder against her chest. She played beneath a single warm spotlight near the back of the lounge where an old, upright piano rested against exposed brick walls. At first, she only performed softly between other musicians. Instrumental pieces, slow jazz arrangements, quiet classical melodies. But over time, something unexpected began happening. People stopped talking when she played. Waitresses paused near tables listening. Strangers stared silently into their drinks while her music filled the room. One snowy Friday night, a college student near the stage quietly filmed part of Elena's performance on his phone while she played a haunting piano arrangement beneath dim amber lighting. She never noticed him recording. Elena closed her eyes while music flowed gently through the lounge, fingers moving across worn piano keys with the kind of emotion that only comes from surviving loneliness personally. The room became almost painfully quiet around her. Even Clara stood motionless behind the bar watching. When the final note faded, nobody clapped immediately. People simply breathed again slowly like they had forgotten how during the song. The video appeared online the next morning. By Sunday evening, nearly 2 million people had watched it. Comments flooded every social media platform asking the same question repeatedly. Who is the woman playing piano like her heart broke beautifully? Some called her the ghost pianist because nobody knew her real identity. Elena discovered the video accidentally while drinking coffee beside her apartment window Monday morning. Her hands froze slightly around the phone while thousands of strangers described her music as haunting, peaceful, heartbreaking, healing. She stared at the screen in stunned silence. For years inside Vincent Moretti's mansion, people barely listened when she played. Now strangers across the country replayed her music at midnight because it made them feel understood somehow. Clara burst through the apartment door 2 hours later, carrying pastries and snowflakes in her hair. "You are famous," she announced breathlessly. Elena laughed softly despite herself. "No," Clara shoved the phone screen toward her. "A music producer from New York messaged the lounge asking about you." Elena's smile faded slightly after hearing New York. The city still felt dangerous somehow. Too close to Vincent's world. Clara noticed the hesitation immediately. "Hey," she said gently, lowering her voice. "Nobody owns you anymore." Elena looked toward the snowy Boston streets outside the apartment windows. Nobody owns you anymore. Such a simple sentence. Yet hearing it felt almost unreal after years of living inside invisible walls disguised as luxury and protection. Later that night, while snowstorm winds swept through Boston outside her apartment building, Elena sat alone beside the keyboard staring quietly at the viral video playing across her laptop screen. Thousands of strangers were listening to music she once believed had disappeared inside her forever. Then suddenly her phone buzzed sharply against the table. Unknown New York number. Elena's chest tightened instantly. Because somewhere deep down, she already knew one terrifying truth with absolute certainty. Vincent Moretti had finally found her. Powerful men rarely panic in public. Their unraveling happens quietly, behind locked office doors, inside empty rooms, and during sleepless nights where silence finally becomes louder than control. Snowstorms continued swallowing New York in white and gray, while Vincent Moretti stood motionless inside his Manhattan office staring at the viral piano video, glowing across his phone screen for what felt like the 100th time. Elena sat beneath warm amber lights inside a small Boston jazz lounge wearing a black dress simple enough that nobody would ever guess she once lived inside one of the most heavily guarded mansions on the East Coast. Her fingers moved across old piano keys while strangers listened like she was giving language to emotions they could never explain themselves. Vincent lowered the volume slowly but did not stop watching. Something about the peace in Elena's face unsettled him more deeply than anger ever could. She did not look frightened. She did not look lost. She looked free. One of Vincent's men stood near the office doorway holding printed reports while tension filled the room heavily enough to suffocate conversation. "We confirmed the location," the man said carefully. "Boston. Small jazz lounge near Beacon Hill." Vincent finally looked away from the phone. "How long has she been there?" "Almost 3 months." Silence followed immediately. Vincent walked slowly toward the windows overlooking snow-covered Manhattan streets 30 floors below. Black cars crawled through traffic while gray winter light reflected across skyscraper glass like cold steel. 3 months. Elena had escaped his world completely for 3 months while he flooded cities with private investigators, security teams, and endless money trying to find someone everyone insisted was too weak to survive alone. Vincent loosened his tie slightly, exhaustion shadowing his face more heavily now than it had in years. "Why did nobody tell me sooner?" The man hesitated carefully. "We did not know it was her until the video spread online." Vincent gave a bitter laugh under his breath. $1 million surveillance network. His eyes returned toward Elena's image frozen on the screen. And she defeats it with a piano. Hours later, snow drifted heavily outside the Moretti mansion while Vincent sat alone inside the East Wing piano room where Elena used to spend most evenings quietly playing beneath the windows. Nothing inside the room had changed since she disappeared. Her untouched sheet music still rested beside the bench. One coffee stain remained faintly visible near the piano lid where she once forgot a cup during late winter nights. Vincent stared at the empty velvet bench for a long time before lowering himself slowly into the seat she used for years. The mansion felt unbearable lately. Too quiet. Too large. Every hallway echoed differently without Elena moving softly through them. For years Vincent believed his world protected her. Now he began noticing details he ignored before. The locked gates. The guards watching every entrance. The way Elena rarely laughed anymore during dinners. How often she stood silently near windows staring outside, like someone emotionally elsewhere already. His phone buzzed suddenly against the piano. Another report. Another failed attempt to understand how Elena vanished so perfectly. Vincent opened the file slowly. Train tickets purchased under old aliases. Cash withdrawals made months apart. Security shift patterns copied carefully onto handwritten notes. His jaw tightened slightly while reading. Elena had not escaped impulsively. She built her freedom quietly piece by piece while everyone around her dismissed her as harmless. That realization shook something inside him more deeply than betrayal. Because it meant Elena spent years planning a life beyond him while still sleeping beside him every night. Vincent closed the report slowly before looking around the silent piano room again. Snow pressed softly against the windows outside, while moonlight reflected silver across the black, grand piano. Then suddenly another realization arrived with devastating clarity. Elena never truly belonged inside this mansion. He simply loved possessing her there. Somewhere in Boston, she played music freely while strangers listened with genuine admiration. Meanwhile, Vincent sat alone in a room filled with luxury that now felt emotionally hollow, without her quiet presence softening it. His phone buzzed again, this time with a message from one of his captains. "We can bring her back whenever you want." Vincent stared at the words for several long seconds before locking the phone screen dark again. Then he looked toward the empty piano bench beside him and finally understood something painful about love that powerful men often learn too late. If a woman has to be forced to stay, she already left long ago. The moment a woman stops fearing a man is usually the moment he realizes how powerless he truly is against losing her. Snow fell softly over Boston the night Vincent Moretti finally saw Elena again in person. The city glowed beneath white streetlights and freezing wind, while black cars moved slowly through icy roads lined with old brick buildings and crowded winter cafes. Vincent stood alone outside a historic concert hall near downtown, dark wool coat buttoned tightly against the cold, while snow gathered lightly across his shoulders. For years, powerful men waited nervously outside rooms for him. Tonight, for the first time in a very long time, Vincent found himself waiting instead. Above the theater entrance, warm golden lights illuminated elegant lettering announcing a sold-out winter piano performance. The Ghost Pianist. Elena never used her real name publicly anymore. Yet somehow that unsettled Vincent even more. She had not simply escaped his world. She had built a new one where she no longer needed the Moretti name at all. Inside the concert hall, soft piano music drifted faintly through heavy wooden doors while guests filled velvet seats beneath crystal chandeliers and gold-trimmed balconies. Boston socialites whispered excitedly about the mysterious pianist nobody could stop talking about online. Some described her music as heartbreaking. Others called it healing. Vincent said nothing while entering quietly through the back of the theater. Men like him usually attracted attention automatically. Tonight he wanted none. The lights dimmed slowly across the concert hall until only a single white spotlight illuminated the grand piano resting center stage. Then Elena walked into the light. Vincent forgot how to breathe for a moment. She wore a long black evening gown simple enough to look elegant without trying. Her blonde hair rested softly against one shoulder, while calm confidence moved through every step she took toward the piano bench. But it was her face that shook him most deeply. Peace. Real peace. Not the quiet obedience she carried inside the mansion for years. This was different. Elena no longer looked emotionally trapped inside herself. The audience fell completely silent as she placed her hands against the piano keys. Then the music began. Soft at first, almost fragile. But beneath the melody lived something stronger than sadness. Freedom. Vincent stood motionless near the back of the theater while the music wrapped slowly around the room. Suddenly memories surfaced without permission. Elena laughing quietly years ago in a tiny Manhattan apartment before money and power consumed his life. Elena practicing piano beside open windows during thunderstorms. Elena waiting alone through endless dinners while he promised himself he would eventually make more time for her. Too many eventuallys. Too many moments he believed would still be there later. When the final note faded, the entire audience stood instantly in thunderous applause. Elena smiled softly beneath the spotlight while snow drifted beyond the theater windows outside. Then her eyes lifted toward the back of the room. Toward him. The applause around Vincent seemed to disappear completely for a second. Elena did not look shocked to see him. Somehow that hurt more. Like she already expected he would come eventually once the silence inside his world became unbearable enough. After the performance ended, guests crowded near the lobby discussing the concert beneath warm chandeliers and expensive winter coats. Vincent waited quietly near a side hallway until Elena finally appeared carrying sheet music against her chest. She stopped walking the moment she saw him standing there. Snowlight reflected faintly through the nearby windows, while silence settled carefully between them. Vincent looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "You look different." Elena held his gaze calmly. "I feel different." Vincent lowered his eyes briefly. "I searched everywhere for you." Elena's voice remained soft. "I know." Another silence followed. Years of marriage somehow standing invisibly between them inside that narrow hallway. Vincent finally stepped slightly closer. "Why Boston?" Elena glanced toward the distant concert hall where strangers still discussed her music with admiration. "Because nobody here knew who I was supposed to be." Vincent studied her face carefully. "And now?" Elena looked at him quietly for several seconds before answering in a voice steady enough to break something inside him. "Now I finally know who I am without you." Outside the concert hall, snow continued falling across Boston, while Vincent stood silently before the woman he once believed too weak to survive without him. And for the first time in his life, Vincent Moretti realized power meant absolutely nothing when standing in front of someone who no longer feared losing you. Regret changes a man slowly. First it steals his sleep, then his certainty, and finally, it forces him to confront the version of himself he spent years avoiding. Snow continued falling outside the Boston concert hall long after most guests disappeared into the winter streets. The city lights reflected softly across icy sidewalks, while freezing wind carried distant traffic through the dark. Inside a quiet private lounge above the theater, Elena stood near the tall windows watching snow drift across the rooftops below. Warm amber lamps softened the room while untouched tea cooled beside her on a small wooden table. Behind her, Vincent remained near the doorway for several long seconds before speaking again. "You planned everything." Elena kept her eyes on the snow outside. "I had to." Vincent slowly loosened the gloves in his hands, exhaustion visible beneath the calm control he usually carried so effortlessly. For years, Elena finally turned toward him. "Do you really want the truth?" The question settled heavily in the quiet room between them. Vincent nodded once. Elena folded her arms lightly against the cold glass behind her. "I started planning the first winter you placed guards outside the piano room because of a meeting downstairs." Vincent lowered his eyes briefly after hearing that. He remembered the night immediately. A rival organization threatened someone connected to him, and security doubled across the estate afterward. At the time, Vincent believed he was protecting Elena carefully. He never considered what constant protection felt like from inside the cage itself. "You could have told me you were unhappy," he muttered quietly. Elena almost smiled, but sadness softened the expression before it fully appeared. "Vincent, I spent years trying." Silence followed immediately, the kind of silence only old relationships understand completely. Snow tapped softly against the windows while distant piano music drifted faintly upward from the empty concert hall below. Vincent looked at her carefully. "I gave you everything." Elena nodded slowly. That was the problem. His jaw tightened slightly. "You lived safely." Elena stared at him for several long seconds before answering softly. "Safe is not the same thing as free." The words landed harder than anger ever could. Vincent walked farther into the room, frustration and grief quietly colliding beneath the surface of his composure. "Do you really think I wanted to control you?" Elena's voice remained calm. "No." Vincent looked genuinely confused for the first time that night. Elena stepped away from the window slowly. "I think you loved me the only way powerful men like you understand love." Her eyes held his steadily now. Possession, protection, control. Vincent swallowed hard beneath the silence pressing around them. Because deep down, part of him already feared she was right. Elena continued softly. "You confused obedience with love." The sentence seemed to hollow the air from the room entirely. Vincent stared at her motionless while snow drifted outside the tall windows behind her. Suddenly, every memory inside the mansion returned differently. Elena sitting quietly through dinners while men discussed business around her like she was invisible. Elena asking permission before leaving the estate. Elena playing piano alone at night while security guarded every door. He spent years believing her silence meant contentment because he never stopped long enough to ask what loneliness looked like from her side of the marriage. Vincent lowered himself slowly into the chair near the fireplace, exhaustion finally overtaking the powerful image he carried for so long. "I thought I was keeping you safe," he admitted quietly. Elena's expression softened slightly then, not with reconciliation, but with understanding. "I know." Vincent looked up at her. "Then why does it feel like you hate me now?" Elena's eyes lowered briefly toward the untouched wedding ring still hanging from a thin chain beneath her sweater. "I do not hate you." That answer somehow hurt him more. Hate still carried attachment. Passion, emotion. What Elena felt now sounded quieter than that. Final. She crossed slowly toward the piano resting near the corner of the lounge and brushed her fingertips lightly across the keys. "The saddest part is that you never realized I was disappearing while I was still standing beside you." Vincent closed his eyes briefly after hearing that. Somewhere below them, workers shut off lights throughout the concert hall one section at a time while Boston disappeared deeper in a snowfall outside. Elena looked toward the dark windows again before speaking one final truth softly enough to almost disappear into the room itself. "Weak women do not survive men like you for years, Vincent." Silence followed. long, heavy, irreversible. And for the first time in his life, Vincent Moretti understood that Elena's quietness had never been weakness at all. It had been endurance. Some love stories do not end with screaming or revenge. They end quietly, when one person finally learns how to live without asking permission to exist. Snow continued falling over Boston after Vincent left the concert hall that night. White flakes drifted through empty streets while black cars disappeared slowly into the freezing darkness beyond the theater district. Elena stood alone near the tall windows of the private lounge long after he was gone, fingers wrapped loosely around a cooling cup of tea while silence settled softly through the room around her. Somewhere below, workers closed the concert hall one section at a time. Chairs folded, lights dimmed, piano covers lowered carefully over polished instruments. Ordinary sounds. Peaceful sounds. Elena watched snow collect across the rooftops outside and realized her chest no longer tightened at the thought of Vincent finding her. That fear had finally disappeared. Weeks passed slowly after Boston. Elena continued performing beneath warm amber lights, while audiences grew larger each month. Music magazines wrote articles about the mysterious pianist whose performances felt emotionally haunting in the best possible way. Invitations arrived from New York, Chicago, and Paris. Clara joked that Elena accidentally became famous simply by playing honestly for the first time in years. But Elena no longer chased approval anymore. That was the strange thing about healing. Once a person stops begging to be seen, the world suddenly notices them naturally. Meanwhile, winter deepened across New York while the Moretti mansion grew colder in ways fireplaces and expensive chandeliers could not fix. Vincent spent more time alone now. The endless meetings continued. Black cars still arrived beneath snow-covered gates. Men still waited nervously for his decisions inside dark offices filled with whiskey and silence. Yet something fundamental inside his world shifted after Elena left. The mansion no longer felt powerful, only empty. One evening, Vincent wandered quietly through the East Wing carrying a whiskey glass untouched in his hand. The piano room door stood partially open beneath dim golden lights. He stepped inside slowly. Nothing had changed. The black grand piano remained beneath the tall windows overlooking frozen gardens. Elena's old sheet music still rested near the velvet bench exactly where she left it months ago. Snow drifted softly outside while moonlight reflected silver across the ivory piano keys. Vincent lowered himself onto the bench carefully, staring toward the empty room surrounding him. For years he believed strength meant control, protecting what belonged to him, maintaining order, never appearing vulnerable. Elena destroyed all those illusions simply by leaving quietly. His phone buzzed softly against the piano beside him. A new article appeared across the screen. The ghost pianist announces spring tour across Europe. Beneath the headline sat a photograph of Elena smiling gently beside a piano in Paris while reporters crowded around her. She looked lighter somehow, freer. Vincent stared at the image for a very long time before locking the screen dark again. Somewhere along the way, the woman he once kept hidden inside a mansion became someone the world admired openly. And the painful truth was that she only flourished after escaping his shadow completely. Outside, snowfall thickened against the estate windows while silence filled the enormous room around him. Vincent finally reached toward the piano keys slowly and pressed a single soft note into the empty mansion. The sound echoed through the halls briefly before fading away. Then another memory returned suddenly. Elena once told him music was beautiful because notes mattered most during the spaces between them. At the time, Vincent barely listened. Now he finally understood. Silence reveals everything people fail to notice while noise distracts them. Elena's silence had revealed loneliness, exhaustion, disappearing love. He simply refused to hear it until the mansion became quiet enough to force him to. Hundreds of miles away in Paris, Elena stood alone on the balcony of a small hotel overlooking rain-covered streets glowing beneath city lights. A soft breeze moved through her blonde hair, while distant music drifted upward from cafes below. Her phone buzzed once with a message from Clara. "You sound happy lately." Elena smiled faintly before typing back slowly. "I think I finally learned the difference between being protected and being loved." She lowered the phone afterward and looked toward the glowing Paris skyline stretching endlessly through the night. Somewhere behind her, a piano waited beneath warm golden light. Somewhere far away, Vincent Moretti sat alone inside a silent mansion, finally understanding the cost of mistaking endurance for devotion. And in the end, the woman he called weak did not destroy his empire. She simply stopped surviving inside it.